Um, and I want to just take a moment to acknowledge Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on the lands on which I live, work, and benefit from every day.
So, Kerry, the news is that you're stepping down after co-founding CFI. Just fill us in on that news. When are you officially out of the role?
I am officially out of the role. I am supporting some transition of projects and inducting some new staff members in CFI. That's my only ongoing roles, other than being a board member. So I've probably got another 2 weeks before I see some white space in my diary.
And probably get a well-deserved rest, I imagine.
Looking forward to it.
So tell us, what were you doing before you founded CSI? Tell us a little bit about Kerry before the collaborative and collective impact journey.
So I feel like I'm in confessional because I am a lapsed lawyer. I spent the first 10 years being a children's lawyer. So I was a criminal lawyer in the children's jurisdiction, and I believed with every pore of my body that being an advocate for children in front of the court was a role that needed to be a role I was drawn to, and a really valuable role in the system. And I still believe that. But what I found, what I experienced is once you become a competent lawyer, you actually are a tour guide. That's what it felt like. I could meet a young person who was often completely terrified in, the police cells or in the court cells. And after you'd spent some time understanding their story and why they're in front of the court, I had this mental story in my head about being able to predict the outcome. And it was an incredibly powerless position to be in, where you're seen as an advocate for change and a voice for children. In fact, the system is entirely predictable. And there would be moments when it wasn't, but it was 99% predictable. And I left the court, I left being a lawyer because of that. If I can go one step further, Matthew, I left retrained in social work and drug and alcohol support to work on the other side. But there was a heroin crisis in New South Wales, and a very engaged Premier. And I wasn't involved in it, but the Premier called a 3-day summit at Parliament House and brought in people who knew about drug addiction from every possible perspective for a 3-day sit down. And they committed to some game-changing new initiatives to combat the heroin sort of flood on the streets. And one of them was to set up the Youth Drug and Alcohol Court. And so they invited me to come back and set up that court as someone who was a children's lawyer with drug and alcohol experience. And it was like I was being schooled in systems change, what it meant to have authorization, where everyone in the system was directed to work radically differently, to change a system designed to punish and forcibly make it a system designed to heal and be therapeutic. And it was extraordinary. It was some of the most exciting work I'd been involved in that system, the most exciting. But they shut it down after 7 years because it was only marginally less expensive than actually putting a child in custody. And I felt like, okay, we have got to get better at understanding what the practice of systems change and how to evidence it is, because we just can't have these snapbacks happen all the time.
That's amazing. We've known each other for such a long time, and I never knew that about you. So that is a fascinating little thing to extract on towards the end of your role with CFI. So how did you get from there to collaborative work and collective impact work and place-based work? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I feel like I've walked a path I'm loving seeing so many familiar faces on the screen, but I walked a path from like an individual advocate to running service organisations. I thought that was like, what are these service organisations doing when they write these court reports for kids and seemingly nothing happens? Running service delivery and support for young people, realising how hard that is actually to work on the root causes and have sustainable support. But I ended up getting into sort of youth mental health, and I worked for a national youth mental health and suicide prevention organisation for about 5 years. And there was again these windows opening. I think that's that's a thing we've got to get better at in systems change. These windows opening around Senate inquiry into youth suicide and promise of new money, Headspace getting funded, millions of dollars flowing, Australian of the Year championing the cause. And we could not get every youth mental health organisation to agree on a shared agenda for what the changes needed to be or the investment flow. And it was really, in some cases we couldn't, and then in moments we got alignment between organisations around effectively policy and funding reform. And it made me want to go and learn, how do you get organisations who are programmed and incentivised to run their own agendas to actually work together? So I was Googling in the middle of the night and came across Collective Impact and sort of read it and thought, well, that is the most useful thing I've ever read on this, and feeling like I can apply something about this tomorrow in the work I'm trying to do. And we raised a small amount of money. My little girl was 3 months old, and we headed off to the US with my partner and her in tow, and spent a month traveling around communities learning about what collective impact meant for them. Of course, I got a totally different response because I had a little baby with me, and I felt completely welcomed and brought into their practice and their vision for change. And that's how CFI started.
So what year was that? I remember reading the Kenny and Kramer article. My wife had been to a meeting in Melbourne and said, I said, how was your trip? And she said, oh, it wasn't very useful for me. But this idea about collective impact came up. Have you read this paper? So I remember where I was when I read the paper too. A number of us have reflected on that. It was quite a crystallising moment. So what year were you wandering around with your 3-month-old doing social policy research in the States? What year was that?
So it's sort of benchmarked to her. She's born in 2012. So we had this very strange experience coming back. I mean, it makes me laugh a little bit because I went there with a colleague, Dawn O'Neill, as well. And I really acknowledge her role, actually. We'd spent a month listening and learning. We split up and sort of summarised and synthesised what we learned. And there was something about having gone to the US and being sponsored by a university that gave what we learnt some sort of platform that felt quite heady and extraordinary and a little bit disproportional. So it's like this speaking tour around Australia about what we'd learned. And I'm thinking, we just spent 4 weeks listening. There's so much to learn about how to do this. But it was enough to open up a new conversation about what would it take to knit together all of the strengths and assets that sit within communities, reframe the roles of citizens and cultural leaders, reframe the role of government and services into more aligned action that actually produces outcomes that people seemingly only feel able to dream of, that don't feel achievable. And now, 8 years later, some of those outcomes are with us. People's lives, and especially children's lives, are different because of this change of practice.
A couple of people have joined us just now. So welcome to Changemakers on Tuesdays. If you haven't been with us before, it's a monthly 1-hour Zoom forum on the second Tuesday of every month, where too much place-based social change is never enough. I'm Matthew Cox, and our guest speaker this month is Kerry Graham, the co-founder of CFI, who's just stepped down from that role. So we're reviewing Kerry's early experiences and what led her to collaborative work. So Kerry, let's fast forward a bit. You've set up CFI. I think I met you for the first time about 2014. I walked into a room full of people. We were trying to get things going in Logan. It was hard. We had to explain everything to everyone about what we were trying to do and why and how. And I walked into a room with you and about 30 other people, and everybody else was trying to do the same thing. And it was that real moment of thinking, oh, thank God I'm not actually mad, that this is a way of working. You'd established CFI by that time. What were those early days like for you?
So those early days, in a way, were incredibly full of promise. And I think that's one of the enduring qualities of this movement, is this sense of possibility and hope. So traveling around the country doing this speaking or sharing of learnings meant we met all of these people and communities that were mobilizing. And like so many of us, people doing the work often from an inherent understanding of needing to work better together, not necessarily informed by frameworks and shared practice at that point, but a real intuitive sense and feeling their way into it. And they just, people and change processes just jumped off the page. They just stood out as extraordinary. And so CFI really started by asking all those people to get together and just see what emerged. But some of the things that I think were important in those early days was how do we intentionally grow a field of practice and a field of impact? You've got to be able to see and touch the field, or let the field see itself, actually. So we ran some processes that, we were all learning. They were sort of clunky, but they served that role. We ran a process called a search, which was to find and fund the most promising collective impact initiative in Australia, and it produced all of these applications, all of these people pitching their EOI in. And they got some capacity building and small funding support to develop their initiative. And we had an international judging panel, and 11 communities were selected as the most promising and established practice of working this way. And when I look at the communities now across Australia whose practice is informing others the most, those communities are largely the same. So this sense of how do you find in a field, how do you help a field emerge? Where are the most promising and deepening of practice? And how do funders and others support that? And how does that become shared learning across the field? They were the types of thoughts and roles that we were trying to take up or support others to take up at the time. And like anything that's on the margins and starting to move into the mainstream, it was very opportunistic driven, wasn't a clearly set strategy, and everyone was on their learning
edge. Kerry, it's a really unusual role for you to be playing, answering the questions. You usually have been such a superb facilitator of other people's thoughts that you're usually asking questions and everyone else on the call's answering them. So here's your chance, folks. You can pepper Kerry Graham with whatever question you like. The way to do that is to drop it in the chat. We'll do it like the Q&A TV program. We'll come to you and ask you to read out your questions. So get busy, pop any thoughts or questions in the chat. Thanks, Angela, for asking about that link across to the Canninger and Kramer paper. We'll certainly follow that up in the post-event email. If anyone can quickly find the link to the SSI article and pop it in the chat for Angela, that'd be great. But get busy with your questions, folks. So that was all about 8 years ago, Kerry, 8 or 9. No, it wasn't 9, about 8 years ago. Did you think we'd get as far as we have so quickly? Or do you agree that we've got an incredibly far way down the track in that period of time? And did you think it'd all happen so quickly?
Yes, is the short answer. I feel like it was more than hope. There was so much drive to find what would work. And there's so much discretionary effort happening all over the place. This is before structured funding was flowing. It really was a sense of like shared holding of this way of working, trying to evidence and authorize it. And so yes, I never doubted, that it would work.
Looking back over that time, are there a couple of things that stand out for you as highlights? What are the things that you think where you sat back on Friday afternoon and you thought, yeah, that was worth doing, that was pretty cool?
Oh yeah, loads. I mean, I felt like on a personal level, I felt like you could never move off your learning edge. So it was a very exciting time. I mean, communities were always pushing the practice ahead of where the field was, and so to be with and in communities and playing the roles that CFI was beginning to play felt like a real privilege, but also, you always had to be on your game because it was the sort of the innovation edge was happening on a daily basis. But I really think, when innovation happens, it's often so dependent on who backs it, who follows. Or for early followers are so critically important. And then there was a group of early philanthropists who were just willing to really back in a set of beliefs and principles and ways of working and people. And those philanthropists are still very much driving, innovative practice in this space. But it took quite a few years before government became involved, and I can sort of, I sort of feel the excitement of the movement or the field growing with each sort of developmental leap. It was sort of the philanthropic leap, the arrival of government. Many of them, I can see the people who were leading government's work in this on the call today, like it enabled so much more. And just the fact that everybody stepped into that role from a role of learning rather than a role of I've arrived now and I'm here to say this is what you need to do. And just working across what is we all know from working in community, working across understanding what it means to shift from a traditional role into an enabling or an adaptive role to support the work. I saw people do their personal work. I saw people do that work inside their own organisations, and I saw the field grow as a result. It's incredibly exciting.
We've got a couple of questions coming in. Thanks, folks who posted them. Tessa's got a really good question. Tessa, do you want to come off mute and ask Kerry your question?
Thanks, Matthew and Kerry. What a privilege to have this opportunity to hear your insights at this point before you leap into the next steps. And I guess I preface this by saying I've really benefited from what I see as real success and impact of your work. And with that context, I'm really interested in what have been some of the challenges, the stumbling blocks, what might be some of the boulders that you think are still in the way, or even just anything that you might do differently if you had your time over.
If I take the first part, Tessa, I think for myself and I think for communities and everyone supporting this work, I think the coupling between what it means to make change in a place and why that inherently requires us to radically reimagine our relationship with First Nations leaders and First Nations families and organisations. To me, this is one of the big shifts that need to happen in the field, and that I wish had started earlier in the practice, because there's a sense I sometimes feel like people feel committed to doing that work, but it means slowing down or going backwards in some way. And I just think if we are truly committed to equity, inclusion and justice as the drivers of this work, then we have to be learning how to lead this together. That community-led change must equal working in co-leadership and partnership with First Nations people. So I have some of my own regrets about that, and I think as a field we've got a big reckoning to do. That's both a challenge and an enormous opportunity. I feel like there's something again about most of the incentives in the field still are for looking for outcomes in a 3-year window, and that the evidence that people rely on to determine if this work is successful is evidence born out of a programmatic mindset. And we need research, we need much bigger research funding to evolve the field. We need that research to be so closely tied to practice. It can't be in 5-year loops. It has to be as real time as we can possibly make it. And we need funders to follow fast that evidence base, because we're applying the wrong evidence hierarchy to this work. And that gap is preventing progress. I think it's doing damage now.
Kerry, Francis has got almost the perfect follow-on question. So we'll go to Francis and then to Lorna. Fran, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, Kerry and Matt. Fantastic discussion. I think I'm really interested in that concept of what comes next. So I love that idea of the learning edge. Where are we in the learning edge? And, what's the big challenge that we really need to tackle? And what windows do we need to really grasp and walk through at the moment?
So one of the things that strikes me, and I say this as an opportunity, I think, is this work's never linear. But if we just for a moment say it is linear, communities who are mobilised and driving this way of working have done extraordinary work in their place about knitting together and working explicitly with conflict, with factions, with different ideologies, different belief systems, constant contests around power and whose voice gets heard. And they're holding and doing that work on a daily basis. And for some reason, now, if you put it in a linear, that communities have done the heavy lifting. They've got alignment to an agenda locally. We need government to do that same work across levels and departments. And for some reason, there seems to be a narrative that it's easier to do in community. And actually, at its core, it's exactly the same work. And so I think there is enormous amounts that governments can learn from how you hold different agendas, the power plays that naturally come around which agenda is preference and priorities, whose voices gets heard, how do you work across factions and different ideologies. But the work that has been done in communities, to me, isn't sufficiently valued by government. And I see the people in this call who are leading this in government and have enormous skills on how to do that collaborative convening and aligning. But it needs greater authorisation within, and it needs more skilled people in government. It's like communities are showing how it's done. I think government can learn from that, but we need to see some significant practice development within government to match communities' practice. And the powerful combination of aligned community, aligned government would be accelerate the field enormously.
We've got time for one more question. Over to you, Lorna.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Kerry. Both those two pieces really resonated with what we're feeling here in Gladstone, making sure that we've got that in time stepping with our First Nations community and being able to provide the space and the pace that accommodates that for our First Nations elders and leaders here in Gladstone. And then the government piece too, I definitely agree. We sometimes kind of put so much emphasis on what government should do, but as a society, are we actually encouraging and supporting the right wages and capacity within government to enable that? So my question, Kerry, might be a bit tricky because you've already given us two pieces of gold there, but the question's just around what's the real X factor that you've seen in those communities that are having great successes? So what are the significant factors that you've observed when you're looking at communities that have shifted the goalposts and had that significant outcomes for their community members? What is it they've done that is different to others?
It's a great question, Lorna. It's like, what's the X factor? So at the highest level, I think the X factor is nothing to do with the technical work. It's everything to do with how do you hold a constant and unwavering vision for hope and possibility, while creating a culture or a way of working that blends accountability, public accountability, with inclusion, and constantly holding the forum open and running and being able to hold all of the diversity of opinions and the conflict that comes with that while never deviating, and helping people and organisations find their enabling role. I think from a so to me, it's the mindset and the skills and the way of working that is the X factor. There's X factor coming, I think, from communities that is going to teach us about how we move into strategic communication and mobilisation. But I feel like the X factor that's got us to here is more people need to learn how to hold that and collectively hold. It's never a single person or a single team. Collectively hold vision, hope, accountability, and inclusion. Yeah, it's a constant dance. Being comfortable with that. You do it very well, Lorna.
We could talk all afternoon, and maybe we should have a follow-up event where we do and get all of the many things we haven't had a chance to discuss with you, Kerry, and all of those experiences you've had all across the country and internationally more widely shared. So maybe there's a follow-up Kerry special. But what's next for you now that you're about to sort of put your feet up for a little while? What's next for you?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm very comfortable with that too. I am looking forward to whatever happens when you mentally detox from the role you've been in, because CFI was born out of a space of just listening and learning and inquiring what's needed now to enable this work, community-led change. And I want to be back in this space, because if you think now we have so much more infrastructure in place and about to be in place. So what is needed to support the bringing this practice further from the margins into the way we work as a country, and what's needed to support that? That's where I want to be exploring. So I'm looking forward to being in conversation with anyone who's interested in those explorations.
Okay, I feel fairly confident this isn't goodbye, and we'll see you in all sorts of ways for many years to come. But for now, could you all join me in thanking Kerry for an extraordinary contribution to the field and for joining us today?
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks so much. We'll move on to our next segment, which is our small breakout segment. We want to give people 5 or 10 minutes to meet each other and get to know each other in small groups. So we're going to offer you a focus question. And the focus question is, what are you hoping for in 2022? So feel free to use that focus question in your small group breakout. The purpose is to get to know what's happening around the country and hopefully meet some people you haven't met before. If you don't like the focus question, use a much better one. Think up a much better one. You'll just have to report back if you think of a better one than that. But hopefully, Paroma is about to put you into probably 5 or 6 little breakout groups. Give you 5 or 10 minutes, say hi, deal with the focus question if you want to, and we'll see you in 5 or 10 minutes. Thanks, Paroma.
Hello.
Hello, that was wonderful. Let me just join really quickly room 9 and let our facilitators know.
I have to step out at this point. I just wanted to come back in and say thanks. They just go so smoothly.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a good chat in your breakout room, met somebody you didn't already know. Hands up if you met someone you didn't already know in the breakout. Well, hopefully somebody did. My computer, good, thank you. Now we're getting some through. Very good. Now to Community of the Month. Our pleasure is to be joined by Abby Grant and Caro Collins from the Gympie Local Level Alliance. Caro and Abby and I was having a chat in the break Gympie's really been smashed in the recent flooding event, so our thoughts are with you both and with your families and the community at large, and hope that the community bounces back as it is so renowned for doing. But Gympie is one of those towns where it was more than just a normal flood this year, so our thoughts are with you. But over to you, Caro and Abby. They're going to take us through a little prezzo on what's happening in Gympie, and then we'll have time for a couple of questions. Caro and Abby, over to you.
Thank you. And I'd just like to make a correction. My surname's actually Grant Taylor. Somehow the hyphen got dropped in the second part of my name. I'm hoping Paroma's going to be able to get the presentation off for us, but we'll get going anyway. We'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country we meet on today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the Waka Waka people and the Butchulla people of our broader region, and also acknowledge all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who live in and work in the Gympie region and call it home. Just next, thanks, Pomona. So where is Gympie? Gympie is both the name of the town we live in and also the name of the larger local government region. A colleague I had used to describe it as we're nestled in between Noosa and Fraser Island, now known as K'gari, and that's one way to look at it. I like to think of Gympie as the gateway to regional Queensland. To the south of us is the populous southeast corner, and to the north and west is what we call the real Queensland. I also like to say, tongue-in-cheek, that there are only two things you need to know about Gympie. The first one is it floods, which most people know now, and the second is that it's hilly. But seriously, the Gympie region covers just under 7,000 square kilometres with a population of just under 53,000. In addition to Gympie City, to our east, we've got the wonderful Cooloola region with Rainbow Beach and Tincan Bay. And if you don't know it, Rainbow Beach is one of the most beautiful beaches in the world, but don't tell anybody. We have the beautiful Mary Valley to our south, and in recent years that's been saved from being converted into a dam for the southeast corner by the community there gathering together and making a protest about that. And that area is now only starting to recover from that shock. And to our west, well, that's what we call the west. It covers towns such as Kilkeevan, which is home of the Great Horse Ride, and Gameri with its annual pumpkin festival, where you can roll a pumpkin down a hill. You go, see, I said it was hilly. And the west also actually includes communities to our north as well. Statistically, we're part of the Wide Bay Burnett region. Administratively, I go, well, that depends on which level of government and which agency and sometimes which day of the week it is, because we seem to be one of those spots on the map that gets moved depending on the requirements of the administrative agencies rather than what's in the best interests of the region and the community. And this has been a challenge for us over many years, and while it is getting slightly better, the fact that we have these changes regularly does take its toll. We just get used to one agency, you get to know them, a change is made, and then you've got to re-establish your linkages and credibility all over again. Or a service that needs to provide services to Gympie comes to town. They stay only as long as the funding lasts. They go away, and we're still here when when that's all finished. Next slide, thanks, Pomona. Some of the key pieces of data that we're looking at from our local level alliance includes things like smoking, the percentage of mothers who were smoking during pregnancy, birth weight of children, percentage with a low birth weight, reading at home and attendance at an early childhood education program starting prior to starting school, and of course the AEDC data, particularly the proportion of kids identified as vulnerable. And the NAPLAN achievements, we're looking at year 3 in particular. Next, thanks, Pomona. Some other data that we're looking at there includes the proportion of young mothers, mothers under 25. As I said, smoking is one of the ones. Attendance at antenatal classes and those sorts of things. So there's a whole lot of things that we're tracking and having a look at through the local level alliance. Next, thanks, Paroma. And one of the things that we struggle with is what we call an external gaze, so that we often feel that when agencies look at us, they do so with an external gaze. They're looking at the numbers, they're looking at how our kids are performing and things like that, but they do that in isolation, so they look at that within their silo, and they also do that without seeking to engage with us. We also find that often services are delivered here on an outreach basis from either the Sunshine Coast or from the Fraser Coast, and it doesn't always work for us because the agency or the worker, they have to establish their own credentials with us, and they don't always do that well. They do we came, we opened our doors, but nobody came. And while the people here are going, who is this mob? What are they doing? Oh, look, they've gone. And then we get a message that it's really hard to connect with people in Gympie. And then when we say, but did you hook in with particular organisations or agencies, they get blank looks. So that's an ongoing challenge for us. And that's one of the reasons why when we had the opportunity to start the local level alliance here, we felt that collective impact offered us the best chance in making some of those lasting changes. And personally, I will have to admit that I've had to change some of my expectations. I was hoping to be able to really attract decision makers, but that wasn't to be because of those factors I've just mentioned. So we work with the people who show up. And the next one, thanks. So sometimes for us, the numbers can be pretty overwhelming. So we knew we had to start somewhere. We decided to look closely at the birth to age 8 range. And we felt that collective impact offered us the best opportunity to do that. The funding that we do have comes through from the Queensland government responses to the Carmody Inquiry into Child Protection. And while we know that kids in care face some of the greatest hurdles in their life trajectories, we also wanted to make a difference for all of our kids. And I just wanted to start with some, I guess, positives. If we can just move on to the next slide. We've got a long history of working collaboratively together as a community. And again, we were just talking to Matthew about that sometimes I think people then think that we can cope. But some of the amazing groups that are already working in our community, we have things like the Gympie Music Muster, which is a major fundraising event for many community groups and schools and PNCs in our region, because all of the people who come and attend that event, that's all export dollars for our community. We also have a group that's got support for people undertaking chemotherapy, where people in the outer parts of our region have to travel to Gympie for treatment, and they can have a place to stay overnight so that they're not travelling home just after they've had a fairly significant chemotherapy treatment. We also have another group called Little Haven Palliative Care, which is an organisation that's providing world-class in-home palliative care and way ahead of their time, who've struggled to get funding, but they have got that in recent years. And another recent one of the groups that we have is the Heart of Gold Film Festival, which is just about to get a gong as an international film festival. So that's started they're the sorts of things that our community does and just gets involved with. So they're pretty amazing community. The next slide, please. For us, data is pretty important. So we said when we were organising through with the collective impact processes that we would look at a range of data indicators. And for us, it is all about our community. There's a few pieces of data that always stick with me when I look at our region, and they're pretty damning in some areas. So according to the CEFA index of the relative socioeconomic disadvantage, so the IRSD, we have 0% of our population in the least disadvantaged quintile and only 2.2% in quintile 4. So that's only 2.2% in the least disadvantaged areas. At the other end, we've got 46.1% of people in quintile 1 or the most disadvantaged, and a further 36.2% in quintile 2, which means that 82.3% of our population are in the lowest 2 quintiles or the most disadvantaged. The Gympie region has higher than average rates of unemployment, lower than average median personal income, and higher than average reliance on a range of welfare payments, pensions, care allowance, disability, those sorts of things. We're older than average, with a median age at around 47, which is around 10 years older than the Queensland average. And a figure that always concerns me, based on my background, is that we have we have 24.8% of families with children under 15 where no parents employed. And that's to me quite a damning statistic for how our kids are looking at where their futures are going. So if we can move on there. The things that we're doing, so we did our first report, next slide, thanks. We did our first State of the Children in Gympie report back in 2017, and we based that on the work that Logan Together had done. And I'd like to acknowledge the assistance and generosity and encouragement that they provided to us when we were setting up. We were actually really surprised at how well that report was received, because people were really interested in seeing data from a range of sources and indicators. So we did a data walk to help decide what areas we could prioritise and where we could make the biggest difference. And the one that had the top vote was reading with children. So that's encouraging the reading with children at home and in the community. So generally in organising, we're using a working group strategy so we can get more people involved and involved in the things that interest them. So next slide, thanks. And we just want to, I'll get Caro now to talk about some of the things that we've been doing in the working groups and some of the things that we've actually been running on the ground.
So I guess the photos on the screen at the moment are about a Books for Kids project, which is a community book swap and storytelling initiative that came from one of those working groups. So we had a lot of energy, we had a lot of collaboration in this working group. Our council, has been driving First by Forever and 1,000 books for 4 kids, and really open to working with community as well and joining with us and trying some new things. So the Books for Kids project was a partnership with the shopping centre, our family support agencies, the library, schools, ECECs. And I guess it was a real way of connecting with families and promoting the message about reading with children from birth. So really a great project to get off the ground. Unfortunately, in the last flood, all of our books have been flooded and washed away. So we're looking at starting, again. So maybe with some new, fresh books. But a great example of the community coming together. This is a completely unfunded project. So just people, goodwill of our community and joining up our efforts to make a difference. On the next slide is just some other projects. Again, some in the shopping centres. We've got our Domestic Violence Partnership Working Group and an Early Years Forum with the hands in the air down the bottom. So I just can't say enough what a wonderful community the Gympie region is to work in. There's so much energy and commitment to working together, which really makes this work, pretty amazing. So
before we go on with this, in this picture, that picture in the top left of the screen is actually a beach kindy. So after the forum we had down the bottom right, one of our kindergartens took the idea of the outdoor play space, and they're based down at Tin Can Base, so they actually take their little kids down to the beach, and we just love it.
And the photo actually shows the library joining them for Beach Kindy to do storytelling at the beach. So I thought that was, pretty special. On the next slide is just, it's a list of some of our different working groups and projects that we've got happening at the moment. And some of the current ones, the kids' health check events at ECECs, again at Tin Can Bay. We ran a project recently where we had our child health nurses come to one of the kindies there, along with bush kids and some allied health services and our healthy play coordinator. So I guess it was a really targeted approach. The kindy have been saying to us, we've got quite a few kids here that need some extra support, and we've been telling mum or dad or grandma, but those referrals weren't progressing anywhere, so for a range of reasons. And so instead of expecting our families to take that step, they brought in the services into the kindy and real wraparound approach. It was just so good, and to see the kids, the way, like the feedback from the agencies that attended was really positive, and that how familiar the kids were in that environment, and families as well. So a really different response than taking a child to a kind of clinical environment and doing those same assessments. So the other project I just wanted to highlight is the Healthy Play and Pop-Up Play project, which came through the LLA directly. So that's like a fun soft entry program for families with young children. And through that, we trialled some non-traditional entry connection points, such as playgrounds and shopping centres, using a hospitality approach where families are valued and served. And the program provided the opportunity to showcase a more family-friendly approach through engagement. So our hospitality approach was an intentional strategy to welcome strangers within a context where acceptance and generosity are prioritised and trust is generated. So I think you'll find with a lot of the LLA programs, it's about, just sometimes trying different ways of connecting with families and working with the people in our community. So that's a program that the Healthy Play program has now funded by PHN. It's got 2 staff, so really expanded and about helping families to navigate the health system now. So really very positive.
And we're also starting to see with that one now we're getting better links into education, because we're like linking that early intervention and identification of issues, and then linking the kids with the schools so that the schools know what they're expecting. So we're getting some good traction there. Yeah. So just moving on to the next forum, the next slide. We, at our last report, we did a report card, and as you can see on there, we made some improvement in some areas, and in some areas we've still got some work to do. We still see smoking as a major area, and we also look at that by extension, alcohol and other drugs. But we know that this is bigger than just us and what we can do. So we've been doing little bits of work to raise awareness and to look at successful public health messaging, like the No Durry for This Murray campaign that our Aboriginal Health Service have been running. So there's a lot of work that we do. We still have a lot of challenges, and I think they were mentioned earlier in the systems change area. We struggle with that. We really struggle sometimes with engaging government agencies and organisations. And sometimes what we find is that organisations presume that there are things that are available in our community that simply aren't. So lack of internet access, lack of phone coverage, black spots, and to be honest, that was actually highlighted and exacerbated in our recent flooding event. So yeah, that's where we're going. And just to the last slide where we still are here. We've been here a few years now. We're just about to redo our data report again this year, because last year was one of those years when all 3 of the major data points were collected, and so that those results will be out this year. So we'll be really interested to see what changes there have been in our community. For us, we're only really small. We don't really have a backbone organisation, and we don't have a lot of funding. In fact, we basically manage this with one worker, which is Caro, who works 11 hours a week. And there's 3 of us who try and support Caro in that, and we're all retirees. And I'd really like to acknowledge the input into our project from 2 people who are not here today. One is Jane Clapton, who couldn't be with us today, but she provides some incredible insights, particularly around applied ethics and systems. And the other one is Barb Ewell, who's now in her 80s, and for many years she was a lone voice who was pushing for early intervention programs and support for families across our region, and has done some amazing work herself. And so they're, I guess, some of the driving voices that sit behind us in the LLA here. So we are happy to take any questions if anyone wants to ask us anything.
Thank you, Caro. What an incredible initiative to have put together with 11 hours a week of paid work. It really is quite extraordinary, and the sophistication of your model and the amount of work that's going on is a real credit to the little town that could, Gympie. We are at time, so questions will have to come out of session. Brenda has asked a fantastic question. Where can people send books to help replenish your book stock? So we'll chase up the answer to that question and put it in the post forum email out to everybody. Congratulations again for an extraordinary achievement already in Gympie, and it just goes to show, I think there's so many community initiatives that just, if we can get a little bit of oxygen, a little bit more money, with some expansion of some government frameworks and programs, then getting in behind the sort of work that you're doing is going to deliver really, really great dividends and really, really quickly. So congratulations again. That's it, folks. Next month, second Tuesday of the month in April, Tony Berg will be our guest speaker. Tony is the chair of the Stronger Places, Stronger People National Leadership Group. So one of the key sources of advice to the federal government about place-based work. So we're really lucky to have Tony's insights. He's a fascinating guy. Amongst other things he's done in his spare time, he started Macquarie Bank and is a CEO of not 1 but 2 ASX listed top 10 companies in Australia. So he's had an incredible career. He's now using all those talents to support the sort of work we all do. So we'll see you second Tuesday in April. Gladstone will be the Community of the Month next month. Stay safe, have a great month, and we'll see you in April.